The rain was freezing as the two security guards grabbed my upper arms, dragging me backward through the grand glass doors. In the lobby mirror, I caught a glimpse of myself, hair in a wild knot, hands heavily stained with permanent blue and brown paint, my old flannel shirt soaked through. Right in front of me stood my mother. She looked at my muddy boots, adjusted her flawless pearl necklace, and gave the guards a cold nod of approval. She was throwing me out of my own father's birthday celebration like I was common trash, all because my clothes didn't match her high society dress code. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. Instead, I looked her straight in the eye, forced my arms out of the guard's grip, and slammed my car keys onto the marble counter right next to a massive, velvet-wrapped package. "Give this to my father," I told the receptionist, my voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "Tell him his gift is waiting." I walked out into the storm, leaving behind a centuries-old secret hidden beneath that velvet cloth, a secret that, just hours later, would bring my proud mother-in-law to her knees on my porch, weeping for my forgiveness. What was hidden under that cloth that changed everything? Hit that subscribe button right now to uncover the full jaw-dropping story. My name is Maya Vance. At 32 years old, I live my life in shades of amber, indigo, and gold. I am a professional art restoration painter. My days are spent in a quiet, sunlit studio, breathing life back into forgotten history. Where others see a ruined canvas, cracked by decades of neglect, I see a story waiting to be saved. I have always believed that everything broken can be beautifully mended if you possess enough patience and devotion. My friends often tell me that my patience is my greatest strength, but it is also my quietest shield. I do not like loud arguments or empty words. I prefer to let my hands, my hard work, and my actions speak for who I am. For the past 7 years, my life has been anchored by an incredible partnership. My husband, Julian, is a 34-year-old landscape architect. He is a man who builds beauty from the earth, just as I restore it on canvas. Our marriage is built on a foundation of deep, unwavering love. We share a small, charming craftsman-style house on the quiet outskirts of the city. Our home is not grand, nor does it feature the cold, shiny marble of high society. Instead, it is filled with the warm scent of cedar wood, rows of well-loved books, and colorful potted plants that Julian nurtures on the porch. Our economic situation is comfortable but decidedly modest. We work long hours, but we earn enough to live a peaceful, fulfilling life. Every morning begins with a shared routine that I treasure. Julian makes fresh coffee while I set the wooden kitchen table. We discuss our projects for the day, laughing over small things, and planning our future. In the evenings, we often sit together in the living room, listening to the gentle hum of the neighborhood. It is a harmonious existence, untouched by the frantic greed of the corporate world. We do not have luxury sports cars or designer wardrobes, but our walls are covered with sketches, memories, and a profound sense of mutual respect. A large part of my heart also belongs to my father, Arthur Sterling. Arthur is a 70-year-old retired carpenter who specializes in crafting antique wooden frames. He is a man of few words, with rough, calloused hands and eyes that always crinkle with kindness. My mother passed away when I was just a young girl, so my father was the one who raised me. He taught me how to look at the world through the lens of an artist. He taught me that true value does not lie in a price tag, but in the love and effort you pour into your creation. My father lives in a small cottage just 2 miles away from us, and our weekend dinners with him are a sacred tradition. Lately, our small family has been buzzing with excitement. My father's 71st birthday is approaching, and Julian and I want to celebrate his long, honorable life with a beautiful gathering. My father has spent his entire life working behind the scenes, making other people's art look beautiful with his handmade frames. Now, it is his turn to be in the spotlight. I want this celebration to be perfect for him. However, as the planning begins, a subtle shadow has started to drift over our peaceful horizon. There is a faint, uneasy shift in the air, a tiny ripple in our quiet waters that signals a change I am not yet ready to face. For a long time, the days continued to glide by with their usual comfort. The sun rose every morning, spilling its golden light across our kitchen table, and my work in the art studio remained a peaceful sanctuary. Julianne and I spent our evenings sitting on the porch, holding hands as we finalized the guest list for my father's 71st birthday celebration. We wanted a warm, intimate gathering filled with Arthur's old friends from the neighborhood, the local craftsmen he had collaborated with for decades, and the few family members we had left. It was an innocent dream, a simple hope to surround my father with genuine love and laughter. In my mind, I could already see the look of pure joy on my father's face. I pictured him sitting at the head of a long table, his rough hands resting peacefully as people toasted to his kindness and his lifelong dedication to his craft. He deserved nothing less than a night where he felt completely valued and seen. Julian shared this vision completely. He even volunteered to design the outdoor lighting and floral arrangements himself, wanting to create a space that felt like an extension of the nature my father loved so much. We were aligned, happy, and entirely focused on making a beautiful memory. Then, the first real sign of change arrived, wrapped in an envelope of heavy cream-colored cardstock. My mother-in-law, Eleanor Vance, decided to interject herself into our plans. Eleanor is a woman who moves through life like a grand ship, expecting the waves to part for her. She is a prominent figure in high society circles, and to her, an event is not a celebration unless it serves as a stage to display one's wealth and social standing. When she learned about our modest plans for Arthur's birthday, she expressed a sudden, intense interest in helping us. At first, her offer seemed like a gesture of goodwill. She claimed that a milestone like a 71st birthday deserved something grander than a simple backyard gathering. She generously offered to secure a private, exclusive room at the Grand Pavilion, a high-end venue in the heart of the city's historic district. She even insisted on covering half of the expenses herself. Julian looked at me with a mixture of surprise and hope, thinking this was his mother's way of finally bridging the gap between our two worlds. Wanting to maintain the peace and believing her intentions were pure, I accepted her offer with sincere gratitude. However, the moment Eleanor took financial control, the atmosphere began to transform. It started with small, almost imperceptible adjustments. When I sent her the list of my father's closest friends, she casually mentioned that the venue had a strict capacity limit and that certain invitations might need to be reconsidered to make room for distinguished guests who could benefit Julian's career. I noticed the subtle exclusion, but I chose to believe it was just a logistical misunderstanding. I did not say anything, choosing instead to focus on the warmth of my daily life. Yet, every time the phone rang, a small knot of anxiety began to tighten in my stomach, a quiet whisper warning me that our beautiful, simple dream was slowly being pulled out of our hands. The first real blow to our peaceful preparation arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Eleanor called a mandatory meeting at the venue to review what she called the final aesthetic adjustments. When Julian and I arrived at the grand marble-floored room of the pavilion, Eleanor was already standing there, holding a leather-bound clipboard and directing the staff with sharp, commanding gestures. As I walked up to her, she barely offered a greeting before handing me a revised schedule. My eyes scanned the paper, and my heart sank. The cozy, intimate dinner we had envisioned had been entirely erased. In its place was a rigid high society gala timeline. Worse, the guest list had been completely altered. My father's lifelong friends, the local mechanics, the neighborhood bakers, and his fellow woodworkers had lines drawn through their names. They were replaced by corporate executives, local politicians, and wealthy art collectors whom my father had never met in his life. When I pointed this out, my voice steady but strained, Eleanor simply smiled a cold, practiced smile. She patted my arm condescendingly and told me that a man of Arthur's age should be honored to have such an elite crowd present, adding that it would look highly inappropriate for people of that background to mix with the high society associates she had invited. She casually remarked that my father was, after all, just a retired man who worked with his hands, and the event needed to reflect the dignity of the Vance family name. The sting of her words was sharp, but I did not lose my temper. I did not yell, nor did I engage in a bitter argument that would only stress Julian. Instead of responding with words, I took a deep breath, neatly folded the paper, and placed it in my bag. My reaction was found in my immediate actions. The very next morning, I went straight to my studio and locked the door. If Eleanor was going to try and erase my father's true identity from his own celebration, I was going to make sure his legacy was undeniable. I walked over to the back of the studio where a large object sat covered by a heavy velvet cloth. For months, I had been working on a secret project, a heavily damaged, centuries-old oil painting that my father had discovered in a neglected estate sale years ago. He had given it to me, recognizing its hidden beauty beneath the grime of time. I knew that restoring this masterpiece was the ultimate tribute to both my father's keen eye and my own skills. I picked up my finest restoration brush, mixed my solvent solutions with precise movements, and began to work with a fierce, quiet determination. My hands were steady, driven by a deep need to protect my father's honor. I poured all my anxiety and hurt into the meticulous strokes of the brush, breathing life into the faded colors. A growing sense of worry hung over me like a dark cloud, and I knew a storm was coming from Eleanor, but I refused to let fear paralyze me. I would let my devotion finish what arrogance was trying to destroy. As the days pressed onward toward the date of the celebration, the small fractures in our family dynamic widened into a deep chasm. The quiet tension that had been brewing in the background finally erupted into a series of serious, deeply hurtful changes. Eleanor did not just stop at altering the guest list. She completely seized control of the entire event, moving through our lives like an unstoppable force, erasing every boundary we had set. The turning point came when I discovered a small but devastating betrayal. While helping Julian organize some paperwork on his desk, I stumbled upon a printed catering itinerary that had been finalized by his mother behind our backs. Traditional menu filled with my father's favorite comfort foods dishes that reminded him of my late mother had been completely discarded. In its place was an extravagant, French-inspired, multi-course meal designed exclusively to impress Eleanor's high society peers. When I brought the paper to Julian, his face flushed with a mixture of exhaustion and guilt. He confessed that Eleanor had pressured him into agreeing, arguing that a simple menu would make their family the laughingstock of the city's elite. Seeing my husband so torn between his loyalty to me and the overbearing demands of his mother cut me to the quick. It was the first time I felt a true, aching sense of emotional isolation. The peaceful sanctuary of our marriage was being invaded, and the simple joy we once shared was being replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. The true weight of the situation hit me a day later when I visited my father at his cottage. As I walked up the gravel path, I saw him through the window, sitting quietly at his workbench, staring at a formal invitation Eleanor had mailed to him. When I walked inside, he looked up at me with a gentle, tired smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He asked me, in his characteristically soft voice, if he needed to buy an expensive tuxedo for the night. He mentioned, with a touch of sadness, that he felt like a stranger being invited to a stranger's house, rather than a father celebrating a milestone with his daughter. Hearing the man who had sacrificed everything to raise me speak with such humility and hidden hurt shattered my heart. It was a profound psychological shift for me. I realized that my silence was no longer protecting the peace. It was allowing Eleanor to diminish the man I loved most in the world. The life we knew, defined by simple honesty and mutual respect, was no longer the same. The boundary had been crossed, and my father was being made to feel small in the name of social prestige. I stood there in his quiet workshop, hugging his frail shoulders, and made a silent, unyielding vow to myself. I would no longer just endure Eleanor's arrogance. I would finish the restoration of the secret painting, and I would present it to him at the gala, ensuring that his dignity and our family's true worth would shine brighter than any artificial luxury Eleanor could buy. With only 48 hours left before the grand event, my purpose became lazy. I knew that the only way to counteract Eleanor's cold snobbery was to unveil a masterpiece so profound that no amount of wealth could eclipse it. I locked myself in my studio, setting a concrete goal. I would work through the night, meticulously removing the centuries of oxidized varnish from the mysterious canvas until the artist's true, vibrant vision was fully restored. My first concrete step was to carefully analyze the final, most delicate layers of the painting under a magnifying lens. The work required absolute concentration. Every stroke of my chemical solvent had to be precise. A single fraction of a millimeter too deep, and the original pigment beneath would be ruined forever. But just as I began to find a rhythmic, healing flow in my work, the outside world violently pushed back. Eleanor, determined to keep me under her thumb, began a relentless campaign of distraction and demands. My phone buzzed incessantly against the wooden table. When I finally answered, Eleanor's voice was sharp and commanding, completely devoid of warmth. She demanded that I leave my studio immediately to drive across town and supervise the delivery of the imported floral arrangements at the pavilion. When I calmly explained that I was in the middle of a critical, time-sensitive restoration project, she scoffed loudly. She told me that my little hobby could wait, and that as Julian's wife, my primary duty was to ensure that the Vance family did not look disorganized in front of the city's elite. The emotional pressure began to mount, feeling like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Julian, caught in the middle of the storm, sent me a gentle text message apologizing for his mother's intensity, but asking if I could please just help keep the peace for one more day. The conflict inside me raged. I wanted to support my husband, but I refused to let Eleanor bully me into abandoning the one thing that would honor my father. The tension in my studio became suffocating. The air felt thick with the scent of turpentine and the heavy burden of expectation. Despite the constant interruptions, I stood my ground. I refused to leave the studio. I turned off my phone, choosing a dignified silence over a bitter argument. I picked up my brush again, my muscles aching with fatigue, but my spirit fueled by a fierce, protective love for my father. As the clock ticked past midnight, the physical and mental exhaustion reached a fever pitch. My eyes burned under the harsh studio lights, and the stakes felt incredibly high. I knew that if I failed to finish this painting in time, I would arrive at the gala empty-handed, leaving my father completely unprotected against Eleanor's cold, corporate circus. The clock on my studio wall showed 4 o'clock in the morning, and the exhaustion was settled deep in my bones. My hands, usually so steady, were trembling slightly from the sheer lack of sleep. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves as I prepared to apply the final, protective layer of clear varnish across the center of the restored canvas. Then, the disaster struck. Because my fingers were stiff with fatigue, my grip slipped. The wide varnish brush tilted awkwardly, and a thick, heavy streak of liquid pooled unevenly across the most delicate section of the artwork, threatening to dissolve the fresh, intricate paint layers beneath. Panic flared in my chest. I rushed to grab a specialized cloth to blot the excess fluid, but in my frantic state, I accidentally smudged a small section of the background. My heart completely stopped. I stared at the canvas, my breath catching in my throat. The pristine, beautiful sky within the painting was now marred by an irregular, cloudy blur. I tried for 2 agonizing hours to carefully lift the smudge and blend the pigments back together, but every attempt only seemed to make the colors more muddy. The clock was ticking relentlessly, mocking my desperation. By 8 o'clock on the morning of the party, I collapsed into my studio chair, completely overwhelmed. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass window. My hair was messy, my eyes were heavily bloodshot, and my clothes were covered in dark streaks of Prussian blue and burnt umber paint. Rationale told me that I had failed. The plan to present a flawless masterpiece was ruined. The timeline was gone, and I felt completely defeated and alone. Julian was already at the venue helping with the morning setup, and I was trapped here, drowning in my own failure. I buried my face in my hands, a single, silent tear slipping through my fingers. I felt like I had let my father down before the battle had even begun. For a long, dark hour, I sat in the stillness of the room, listening to the distant sound of morning traffic, feeling entirely powerless against the grand machinery of Eleanor's high society world. Yet, just as I was about to cover the canvas in defeat and give up entirely, a stray beam of actual morning sunlight broke through the studio skylight. The bright, natural light hit the painting at a sharp angle, illuminating the deeper layers beneath my mistake. I blinked, leaning forward. Because the sun was so bright, I could see that the smudge hadn't actually ruined the structural paint. It had merely created a temporary film over the masterfully applied old oils. If I used a highly concentrated, gentle citrus solvent, I might just be able to strip away the ruined top layer without touching the restoration underneath. It was a tiny, risky, and incredibly fragile ray of hope, but it was the only door left open to me. I grabbed my finest scalpel and a fresh cotton swab, refusing to let the story end in darkness. For 6 frantic, agonizing hours, I worked with the precision of a surgeon. My world narrowed down to a single square inch of canvas. With every gentle stroke, the cloudy smudge began to lift, revealing the pristine, vibrant colors beneath. By the time the painting was finally clear, dried, and safely locked into the beautiful antique wooden frame my father had carved years ago, the clock showed 6 o'clock in the evening. The gala had already begun. I did not have a single second to change my clothes, wash my face, or fix my hair. I wrapped the massive, heavy frame in a protective velvet cloth, carried it out to the trunk of my car, and drove toward the grand pavilion like my life depended on it. The rain was pouring down in sheets, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon. The emotional tension inside me was at an absolute maximum. When I finally pulled into the grand driveway of the pavilion, the valet looked at my mud-splattered car with immediate disdain. I ignored him, stepping out into the cool evening air. I was a stark contrast to the venue's I was wearing my old jeans, an oversized flannel shirt, and my boots, all heavily stained with permanent streaks of Prussian blue, white, and dark brown paint. My hair was tied in a messy, hurried knot, and my face was pale with exhaustion. As I pushed through the heavy glass doors into the main lobby, the sound of classical live music and polite laughter echoed from the grand ballroom. I walked toward the registration desk, carrying the massive, wrapped painting in my arms. But before I could even reach the threshold of the room, a sharp, cold voice cut through the air, stopping me dead in my tracks. "Stop right there!" Eleanor commanded. She walked out from the ballroom, looking absolutely regal in a designer emerald silk gown and a string of flawless pearls. Her eyes scanned my appearance from my muddy boots to my paint-stained hands, and her expression instantly twisted into absolute disgust. Behind her, several wealthy high-society guests stopped talking, turning their heads to stare at the scene. "What do you think you are doing, Maya?" Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling with a quiet, furious rage. "Look at you! You look like a vagrant. I have corporate executives, judges, and foreign investors inside celebrating a dignified milestone, and you dare to show up looking like a common laborer? You are embarrassing my son, and you are humiliating this family." "Eleanor, this is my father's 71st birthday," I said, my voice hoarse but completely steady, holding the heavy frame tighter against my chest. "I am here to give him his gift. Let me pass." "Absolutely not," Eleanor snapped, her eyes flashing with malice. She did not even care what was beneath the velvet wrapping. To her, my appearance was an unpardonable sin against her social standing. She turned her head toward the entrance and raised her hand, signaling to large, uniformed security guards standing by the door. "Security," Eleanor said loudly, ensuring everyone in the lobby could hear her. "Please escort this woman out of the building, immediately. She does not belong to this event, and she is causing a disturbance." The two large guards stepped forward, placing themselves directly between me and the ballroom doors. I could see Julian's silhouette through the frosted glass, completely unaware of what was happening outside. The pressure was suffocating, the public humiliation absolute. I was faced with a devastating final choice: make a loud, undignified scene that would ruin my father's night completely, or walk away into the rain. The two security guards stepped closer, their expressions uneasy but firm as they waited for my reaction. Eleanor stood behind them, her chin tilted upward, a triumphant and cold smile playing on her lips. She expected me to cry, to scream, or to beg her to let me see my own husband and father. She wanted me to act like the unrefined person she always believed I was. But I looked her dead in the eye, and a profound calm dignity settled over me. I refused to lower myself to her level. I would not give her the satisfaction of a public breakdown. "Do not touch me," I said to the guards, my voice quiet, smooth, and laced with an authority that made them instantly freeze. I stepped back toward the registration desk. With slow, deliberate movements, I placed the massive velvet-wrapped painting gently against the mahogany counter. I took my car keys out of my pocket and placed them right next to it. I looked at the head receptionist, who was watching the scene with wide, sympathetic eyes. "My car is parked out front," I told her clearly, ensuring my voice carried across the silent lobby. "Please have the valet load this package into the back seat of my car. Then, I want you to walk into that ballroom, find my husband, Julian, and hand him these keys. Tell him his wife left his father-in-law's gift in the car, and that she is taking a taxi home." Eleanor scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. Yes, do that and leave. We have a schedule to keep." I turned my back on Eleanor without saying another word. I walked out of the grand sliding doors, my head held high, stepping out into the pouring rain. As I sat in the back of a yellow taxi, watching the glowing lights of the pavilion fade into the distance, my heart ached, but I felt a strange sense of peace. I had protected my father from a scene, and I had left my truth behind. Meanwhile, inside the grand ballroom, the receptionist did exactly as I asked. She bypassed Eleanor, walked straight up to Julian and Arthur, who were standing near the stage, and handed Julian the keys while delivering my message. Julian's face went pale. "What do you mean she left?" he asked, a sudden wave of panic hitting him. Arthur's kind eyes narrowed, sensing immediately that something was wrong. "Where is my daughter, Julian?" Without waiting for an answer, Julian, Arthur, and a curious crowd of guests followed them out into the lobby, where Eleanor was busy smoothing down her silk gown. Julian demanded to know what happened. When Eleanor proudly explained that she had simply removed a disheveled disturbance to protect the family's image, Julian's eyes flashed with a rare, furious disappointment. "That disturbance was my wife, Mother," Julian said, his voice shaking with deep emotion. Before Eleanor could reply, Arthur walked right past her, out into the driveway, and commanded the valet to open the trunk of my car. Julian and half of a gala guests crowded around in the rain as Arthur carefully pulled back the heavy velvet cloth to reveal the restored painting. The moment the cloth fell away, a collective gasp echoed through the crowd. The lobby went completely, devastatingly silent. It was a magnificent, breathtaking oil portrait of a serene countryside estate, restored to flawless, vivid perfection. But it wasn't just any painting. In the bottom right corner, a distinctive, elegant signature was clearly visible. V. Vance, 1940. Eleanor pushed her way through the crowd, her breath catching violently in her throat as she stared at the canvas. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably, and the color completely drained from her face. This was the final, unfinished masterpiece, painted by her own late father before he passed away. A priceless family heirloom she believed had been destroyed in a fire decades ago. It had actually been rescued and preserved by Arthur, and painstakingly brought back to life by the very hands she had just called dirty. The silence that blanketed the grand lobby of the pavilion was heavy, broken only by the steady rhythm of the rain outside. Eleanor stood frozen, her eyes wide as they traced the brilliant brushstrokes of her late father's work. Every elegant line, every vibrant color she remembered from her childhood had been restored with absolute, flawless perfection. Her hands flew to her mouth as a quiet sob finally broke through her rigid exterior. She realized that the treasure she had spent a lifetime mourning had been saved by the people she despised most. Arthur stepped forward, his weathered hand gently resting on the edge of the frame he had built with his own fingers. He looked at Eleanor, not with anger, but with a deep, quiet pity. 20-year-old history doesn't lie, Eleanor, Arthur said, his voice calm but powerful enough to echo in the silent room. My late wife and I found this piece heavily damaged in an old estate sale decades ago. I knew who painted it. I kept it safe, hoping that one day my daughter would have the skill to bring it back to you. Maya skipped sleep, skipped eating, and worked until her hands were raw just to finish this for tonight. She wanted to give your family its history back. Julian looked at his mother, his face tight with a mixture of grief and utter disappointment. You threw away the one person who actually cared about our family's heart. Mother, Julian said, his voice trembling. You were so busy looking at her clothes that you never even bothered to look at her soul. Without another word, Julian grabbed his coat, turned his back on his mother, and walked out into the pouring rain to find a car. Arthur followed him, leaving the gala behind. The high society guests who had witnessed the entire scene began to whisper among themselves, their glances turning from admiration to deep disapproval as they looked at Eleanor. The corporate executives and elite associates she had tried so hard to impress were now looking at her with an undeniable sense of cold rejection. Her grand social standing, the very thing she had sacrificed her humanity to protect, had crumbled in a matter of seconds. The consequences of her arrogance were immediate and total. The music inside the ballroom stopped, and one by one, the guests began to call for their coats, quietly leaving the venue. Eleanor was left standing alone in the grand, empty lobby, holding the magnificent painting of her father. The weight of her profound regret was suffocating. Every cruel word she had spoken to me echoed in her mind, tearing down her walls of pride. Meanwhile, back at our small craftsman home, I sat in the quiet living room, wrapped in a warm blanket with a cup of hot tea. The peace of our home welcomed me back, a stark contrast to the cold hostility of the pavilion. An hour later, the front door opened, and Julian and Arthur walked in. Julian rushed to my side, kneeling on the floor and pulling me into a fierce, protective embrace, whispering apologies into my hair. Arthur sat beside me, his eyes shining with pride, telling me that my hands had created a miracle. In the gentle quiet of our living room, surrounded by the people who truly valued my heart, the sting of the evening began to fade. We spent the next hour celebrating my father just as we had originally intended, simply, warmly, and with genuine love. Julian made a fresh pot of coffee, and we shared a small cake at our wooden kitchen table, laughing over old memories. My father's 71st birthday was not filled with high society executives or classical orchestras, but it was perfect because it was real. Just past midnight, the soft chime of our front doorbell broke the silence of the night. Julian and I exchanged a worried glance. When Julian opened the door, we were stunned to see Eleanor standing on our porch. The pouring rain had completely ruined her perfect hair, and her expensive emerald silk gown was damp and wrinkled at the edges. In her arms, she was carefully holding the massive, restored painting. The cold, proud socialite was entirely gone. In her place stood a deeply broken woman, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. She stepped into our living room, her hands shaking as she looked at me. For the first time since I had known her, Eleanor lowered her chin. She walked over, set the painting gently against the couch, and fell to her knees right in front of me. Tears streamed down her face, washing away the last remnants of her high society makeup. "Maya, please," Eleanor sobbed, her voice cracking with a raw, agonizing regret. "I am so deeply sorry. I was so blinded by my own vanity, so obsessed with what people thought of me, that I treated the most beautiful soul in this family like garbage. You spent days pouring your love into restoring my father's memory, and I used the very hands that saved my history to push you out into the dark. I don't deserve your kindness, but I beg for your forgiveness." The room was completely still. Julian stood by the door, watching his mother with a solemn expression, leaving the decision entirely up to me. I looked down at Eleanor. I could have chosen to be bitter, to remind her of every cruel word she had ever spoken to me. But as an artist who restores broken things, I knew that revenge never heals a fracture, only grace does. I leaned forward, reached out my paint-stained hands, and gently took Eleanor by the shoulders, helping her up to sit beside me on the sofa. "Your father's painting was meant to bring joy, Eleanor, not pain," I said softly, my voice filled with a calm, unshakable dignity. "I forgive you. Let the brokenness end tonight." Eleanor buried her face in her hands, weeping with a profound sense of relief. That night, the dynamic of our family changed forever. Eleanor's arrogance was completely undone, replaced by a newfound humility and a deep, permanent respect for the work that Julian and I did. Our journey taught us a beautiful, lasting lesson. True worth is never defined by the clothes we wear, the money in our banks, or the social circles we try so hard to impress. True dignity is found in the love we choose to give, the patience we practice, and the respect we show to those who work hard with their hands and their hearts. Material luxury can fade in a second, but a legacy built on genuine devotion and forgiveness will endure forever. What do you think of Maya's decision to forgive Eleanor at the end? Would you have done the same thing if you were in her shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this emotional family drama inspired you, please click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next heartfelt, original story.